My Lords, we now come to the fourth oral question. Lord Paddick.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the Government supports the police in the fair and legitimate use of stop and search and, where necessary, reasonable force to tackle criminality and violent crime. We have worked with the police to put safeguards in place to ensure that no one is targeted because of their race.
I call Lord Paddick.
My Lords, like previous research, this report doubts the efficacy of stop and search in reducing serious crime. But more importantly, it highlights the impact of disproportionality on trust in and the legitimacy of the police. 40 years ago, Lord Scarman, in his report on the Brixton riots, said enforcement of the law needed to be balanced against the negative impact of enforcement on communities. This report effectively criticises the police service for not having learnt the lessons of the 1981 Scarman report. What action is the government going to take?
Well, my Lords, I have to say that I trust the police to use their powers in a fair way to tackle serious violence and protect communities. It is right that these powers are used to stand firm against criminals who break the law. Every knife taken off our streets is a potential life that is saved. And in 2019-20, stop and search removed over 11,000 weapons and firearms from our streets and resulted in over 74,000 arrests. There is a tragedy, which is that young black men are disproportionately more likely to be the victims of knife crime, and nobody should be targeted because of their race. And the extensive safeguards that are in now, such as statute codes of practice and use of body-worn video, are important safeguards to ensure that it doesn't happen.
Lord Harris of Haringey.
I refer to my interest in the register, my Lords, and following on from that answer, we all want proper scrutiny of stop and search, but we've also seen highly disturbing clips on social media of what appear to be inappropriate stops. Those who post them have surely waived their right to privacy. Given that, as police body-worn video makes it possible to see the context, in particular what went on before the stop and why it took place, will the government make it possible for the police to publish the full videos in a timely fashion to counteract misleading impressions from truncated social media clips?
Well, I totally concur with the noble Lord that sometimes what you see in a snapshot is not actually indicative of what happened in the round. Obviously, the police are operationally independent of government, but what I would say is that the safeguards, which include body-worn video and data, are very, very important in this area, and we now collect more data on this than ever before, allowing local scrutiny groups, precinct crime commissioners and others to hold the forces to account. But I thank the noble Lord for that question, because I think it's a very important point.
Jones of Moulscombe.
This was an exceptionally damaging report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. And they do talk about how the use of stop and search for drug possession just is not an effective use of police time. So one option for the Home Office is perhaps, as they are lead department on drugs policy, to actually update their drugs policy and make it more relevant, bearing in mind this report. Is that something the Home Office is going to do?
Well, I think the noble lady takes one aspect of something which is drugs use and conflates it into what is actually a much more complex issue. Drugs possession, knives possession, offensive weapons possessions are all linked in a complex web of criminality and of victimhood too. Young people carry knives to protect themselves. Drugs, it's all it's linked, it's complex, and I will go back to the point that any stop and search should be reasonable and should be proportionate.
Lord Davis of Gower.
Thank you. As a former police officer, I recognise the importance of stop and search as a tool, but a recurring theme in the report is that of training. The report is very clear where it says that the results of the review of stop and search records suggest that supervisors need further training on their responsibilities and how best to supervise their officers' use of stop and search powers. It also goes on to tell us that research shows that lasting improvements are only achieved when a force's culture promotes diversity, inclusion and equality. Ingredients, I argue, that are the responsibility of those at the top and throughout the organisation to develop and engender. Would my noble friend the Minister agree that if police are to rid themselves of accusations of disproportionality, then they must first address these training issues at all levels?
I would totally agree with my noble friend, because good training and, as he said, diversity within forces should really improve the performance in this area. And in terms of, sorry, I can't remember the other point that he made, but yes, training is absolutely crucial, because unless these officers are trained, they will not be equipped to deal with these issues.
Lord Woodward.
My Lords, this is an honest and fair report. I want to declare my interest as a board member for Police Now, which seeks to recruit graduate police officers to the police, particularly from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. I would say that my job, our job, is made that much worse when we see the levels of stop and search for Black youths at 9 times higher than their white peers. You know, during lockdown, when 95% of the nation was in lockdown, stop and search for Black youths went up 25%. Stop, search, and often humiliated. And not for knives in general, 70% was through drugs, often the smell of marijuana that people said that they did.
Can the noble lord please ask a question?
Minister, agree with me that this disproportionality that alienates so many youths and puts off so many youths from joining the police must change. We must police by consent.
I agree that we must police by consent. I also agree that someone should never be stopped on the basis of their race, and that the use of stop and search must be both reasonable and proportionate.
Baroness Sanderson of Welton.
My Lords, we were told that increasing the use of Section 60 powers was necessary to suppress levels of violence and knife crime. Yet, according to this report, of all the Section 60 searches in 2019-2020, only 3.7% found a knife or a weapon. Meanwhile, disproportionality has increased, with Black people 18.1 times more likely to be searched under Section 60 than white people. Given the damage that Section 60 searches can cause to community relations, and in light of the very low find rates, can my noble friend the Minister tell me whether there are any plans to review this policy?
Well, we actually, as the noble lady probably is alluding to, we eased the restrictions on stop and search back in 2019-20, and stop and search went up by, in 2019 we eased the restrictions, and stop and search went up by 53%. But it led to 74,000 arrests and 11,000 arrests for knives and weapons. I think the important thing is that where people are stopped and searched, that there is intelligence to underpin the reasons for stop and search, and that point about Black people being 18 times more likely, it is a very troubling figure. It actually has gone down rather than up. So the situation was actually worse. Not that justifies it, but I do think going back to that reasonable and proportionate approach is the important one.
Lord Rosser.
Is that no force fully understands the impact of the use of stop and search powers, that disproportionality persists and no force can satisfactorily explain why, and that there are wide differences between performance of forces on the use of stop and search powers and disproportionality. What action does the government intend to take to ensure greater consistency of approach between forces on the use of these powers. Surely there should be at least a broad national standard that's actually adhered to. Or does the government disagree and believes it's all an operational matter for each individual chief constable?
Well, I would say to the noble lord that actually the use of data is very important, and police collection of data is very important to interrogate why some of the trends that we see are happening. But I would also say that in many ways it is more complex than just the data we have, and some of the social and economic factors in this have to be taken into account. But it is very important that the collection of data is also scrutinised as we go forward.